At its peak, it drew more than 1 million visitors in a single summer weekend. It invented the large-scale amusement park, launched the modern roller coaster, and turned a stretch of Brooklyn Beach into one of the most famous entertainment destinations on Earth. Then it burned down several times. This is the entire story of Coney Island, the sinking entertainment center. Before the parks, a beach with problems. Coney Island is technically a peninsula. The sandbar that once separated it from the Brooklyn mainland has long since been filled in. Sitting at the southern tip of Brooklyn, facing the Atlantic Ocean. Europeans arrived there in 1609, and for the next 2.5 centuries it was mostly farmland, some scattered fishing operations, and a beach that people occasionally visited when they needed to get out of the city. By the 1840s and 1850s, a handful of hotels and bathhouses had started appearing along the shore, catering to the wealthier class of New Yorker who could afford a day trip to the beach. The eastern end of the island, around what would become Brighton Beach and Manhattan Beach, was relatively refined. Grand hotels, carriage rides, ocean bathing for those who could pay. The western end was something else entirely. It was where the rules loosened. Gambling operations, saloons, and a general atmosphere of unregulated pleasure had given the western stretch of Coney Island a reputation the respectable establishment classes found distressing. By the 1870s, investors from the city had poured more than $20 million into the area, building larger hotels and amusement facilities that began attracting middle-class visitors alongside the wealthy. But the rougher elements remained, and Coney Island's early nickname, Sodom by the Sea, was not a compliment. It was the kind of place where New York sent its misbehavior on weekends. What changed everything was transportation. The extension of the railroad to Coney Island, followed by the eventual arrival of subway service from Manhattan to Coney Island by 1920, fundamentally altered who could afford to visit and how many of them could get there. Suddenly, the beach wasn't for the wealthy few who owned carriages or could afford high-end hotel rates. It was for everyone. And when everyone showed up, entrepreneurs showed up to take their money in organized, systematic, and occasionally spectacular ways. Sea Lion Park and the idea that changed everything. In 1895, a man named Paul Boynton opened Sea Lion Park on the western stretch of Coney Island, and in doing so, accidentally invented a concept that would define American entertainment for the next century: the enclosed amusement park that charges a single admission price at the gate. Before Sea Lion Park, amusement areas were mostly open affairs, collections of individual rides and shows, each charging separately, scattered across a space without any organizing structure or boundary. Boynton's innovation was to put a fence around everything, charge admission at the door, and then offer a curated collection of attractions inside. The park featured sea lions, hence the name, as well as a shoot-the-chutes water ride that became one of Coney Island's signature early experiences. It also had a boating lake, an early roller coaster, and a handful of other amusements that made the enclosed park feel like a comprehensive entertainment destination, rather than a random collection of things to do. The genius of the format was partly psychological. Once you'd paid to enter, everything inside felt like it belonged to you for the day. A sense of value and permission that individual ticketing never quite delivered. You weren't constantly deciding whether each individual attraction was worth its price. You'd already made that decision at the gate, and now you were simply making the most of what you'd paid for. Sea Lion Park was a modest success, but never a great one, and Boynton found himself increasingly squeezed by the competition developing around him. He closed it in 1902, but the idea he had demonstrated, that people would pay to enter a defined entertainment space, was about to be taken by people with considerably more ambition and considerably less restraint. Steeplechase Park, the first major player. George C. Tillieu opened Steeplechase Park in 1897, 2 years after Sea Lion Park, on the beach between West 16th and West 19th Streets. Tillieu was a born showman, Coney Island born and bred, and he understood his audience with an accuracy that more refined entrepreneurs consistently underestimated. The park's signature attraction was the steeplechase ride itself, a roller coaster on which guests straddled horse-shaped carts that raced along a track simulating a steeplechase horse race. It was competitive, physical, and it put men and women in close proximity in ways that Victorian social conventions would otherwise have prevented, which turned out to be enormously popular with both. The ride became so associated with the park that it gave Steeplechase its name, and Tillieu's grinning cartoon mascot, a wide-toothed, slightly unnerving face known as Funny Face or Tilly, became one of the most recognizable images in New York entertainment. Tilyu had a gift for the proposition that fun and a mild degree of harmless embarrassment were the same thing. Many of Steeplechase's attractions were designed to put guests in slightly undignified positions. A giant slide where you had no control over your landing, a blowhole in the floor that gusted air upward at women walking over it, a spinning wheel designed to throw passengers outward into a padded wall. The audience watching from the stands at the Pavilion of Fun, who got to observe all of this happening to other people, was as much part of the entertainment as the attractions themselves. In 1907, fire destroyed Steeplechase Park, the first of many fires that would shape Coney Island's history. Tilyu's response was immediate and characteristically entrepreneurial. He charged people 10 cents to walk through the smoldering ruins while he rebuilt. He had signs posted at the entrance. "I had troubles yesterday that I have not today. On this site will be erected shortly a better, bigger, greater Steeplechase Park." The rebuilt park opened and continued operating until 1964, making Steeplechase the longest-lived of Coney Island's 3 original major parks. Luna Park, the one that changed everything. Frederick Thompson and Elmer "Skip" Dundee had built a ride called A Trip to the Moon for the 1901 Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. The ride put guests in a fanciful airship, complete with flapping mechanical wings, that carried them over a simulated Niagara Falls and into a papier-mâché lunar landscape where costumed Selenites greeted them. It was an immersive experience years ahead of its time, and it was wildly popular. Tilyu invited them to bring the ride to Steeplechase for the 1902 season. They did, and it drew massive crowds, but Thompson and Dundee had bigger plans. They leased the land where Sea Lion Park had operated, expanded onto an adjacent site, spent $700,000, which they advertised as $1 million because showmanship, completely rebuilding and transforming the space, and opened Luna Park on May 16, 1903. What they built was unlike anything that had existed before in American entertainment. Luna Park featured 250,000 electric lights at a time when electrification was still new enough to be genuinely spectacular. The park's towers and minarets, influenced loosely by Middle Eastern and Moorish architecture, were outlined in light, creating a visual effect after dark that stunned visitors who had never seen anything like it. A trip to the moon was there, along with a Shoot the Chutes, a canal ride through a simulated Venice, an elephant that could be ridden, a working fire station, and a menagerie of other attractions. Roller coasters, a cyclone ride, a submarine journey, and dozens of other experiences filled the space. Billboard magazine described Luna Park and Dreamland in 1904 as the twin sisters of magnificence. The park drew 1 million visitors in its first 2 weeks. By 1904, Coney Island's broader West Brighton area was receiving over 23 million visitors in a single year. Luna Park was the engine driving most of that traffic and the model everyone else tried to copy or compete with. John Casson wrote in 1978 that Luna Park appealed to popular notions of magnificence. It gave ordinary working-class New Yorkers access to an experience of grandeur and spectacle that previously only existed in places money couldn't get them. Thompson was the creative force. Dundee was the business mind. Together, they worked. Apart, they struggled. When Dundee died unexpectedly in 1907, Thompson began a long slide into financial trouble, compounded by expensive personal decisions, including backing theatrical productions, starring his wife to mixed results. By 1912, Thompson had lost Luna Park to creditors. He left for San Francisco to build an amusement park called Toyland, which failed and died in June 1919. Luna Park survived under a series of different owners, diminished from its peak but still drawing visitors, until the Dragon's Gorge, one of its original rides, caught fire in August 1944 and burned the park to the ground. In a final echo of Tilyu's response to his own fire decades earlier, the owners charged admission to view the ruins. Dreamland, bigger, briefly. William H. Reynolds, a former state senator and Brooklyn real estate developer with a talent for ambition and a limited talent for patience, watched Luna Park open in 1903 and immediately decided he could do better. He announced plans for a new park in July 1903, just weeks after Luna Park had opened, and spent an estimated $3.5 million building Dreamland, which opened on May 15, 1904. Reynolds' strategy was blunt. Everything at Dreamland would be bigger than Luna Park. Where Luna Park had 250,000 electric lights, Dreamland had 1 million. Where Luna had a central tower, Dreamland had a taller one. Where Luna had a Shoot the Chutes, Dreamland had a larger one. The park also went for a more refined, elegant aesthetic than the chaotic energy of its competitor. More white architecture, more orderly layout, more emphasis on what Reynolds considered high-class entertainment. Dreamland had a midget city, staffed by little people who lived and worked within a miniature town as an attraction. An exhibition format common at the era's World's Fairs and amusement parks, that is, by modern standards, deeply uncomfortable to describe. It had a creation ride, an infant incubator exhibit, where premature babies were displayed as an attraction. The same doctor, Martin Coney, ran incubator exhibits at multiple World's Fair sites and had a legitimate argument that the public attention helped fund care for the infants. A working fire department, and a spectacle called The End of the World, among dozens of other shows. Despite spending more than Luna Park, Dreamland was never quite as well managed. Reynolds kept changing attractions every season, couldn't achieve the same operational efficiency as his rivals, and couldn't capture the audience Luna Park had cultivated. The two parks were competing for the same visitors in the same geographic market, and the math was difficult. On the early morning of May 27, 1911, just after the start of Dreamland's 8th season, a worker accidentally kicked over a bucket of hot pitch during maintenance work. The fire spread through the park's wooden buildings faster than firefighters could contain it, in part because of low water pressure. Nearly every structure in Dreamland burned to the ground within hours. The lions from the animal attraction escaped into the surrounding streets, creating a spectacle of a different kind as they were rounded up and in some cases shot by police. No visitors were killed. The fire started in the early morning before the park opened. But Dreamland was gone. Reynolds never rebuilt. He charged people admission to look at the ruins, pocketed what he could from the insurance and bond arrangements, and moved on. The Golden Age and its end. The period between roughly 1895 and 1911 represents Coney Island's most genuinely extraordinary chapter, not just for New York, but for American popular culture. The three competing parks, along with the dozens of independent rides, sideshows, and midway operations that surrounded them, drew millions of visitors from across the city and the country. Art historian Robin Jaffe Frank described Coney Island as a laboratory for the invention and testing of social, commercial, and technological ideas. What was being invented, specifically, was the modern American concept of leisure, the idea that ordinary working people could and should spend money on entertainment and pleasure. That fun was not a privilege of the wealthy, but an industrial product available to everyone who could buy a ticket. The Cyclone roller coaster opened in 1927 and remains one of the most celebrated wooden coasters in the world. Charles Lindbergh reportedly called it more thrilling than flying across the Atlantic, which is either a remarkable endorsement or a comment about transatlantic flight conditions in 1927. The Wonder Wheel, a 150-foot Ferris wheel, opened in 1920 and still stands as one of the most recognizable landmarks on the Coney Island skyline. The boardwalk extended along the beachfront, lined with hot dog stands, shooting galleries, bathhouses, and sideshows, selling every kind of novelty and spectacle the era offered. Nathan's Famous opened its first hot dog stand at Coney Island in 1916 and eventually turned the Coney Island hot dog into a nationally recognized institution, with the annual 4th of July eating contest drawing media coverage that Nathan's founders could never have imagined when they were simply selling franks on Surf Avenue. The Depression-era Coney Island became known as the Nickel Empire, the one place in New York where a family with almost no money could spend a full day at the beach and ride a few attractions. The subway ride from Manhattan cost a nickel. The beach was free. Even in the worst economic years of the 1930s, Coney Island kept drawing crowds who had nowhere else to go. This was, in its own way, a social function as important as anything the Golden Age parks had provided, a pressure valve for a city under extraordinary economic strain. But the parks were aging, the infrastructure was deteriorating, and the Great Depression had effectively frozen new investment. After World War II, the forces that would eventually hollow out Coney Island began operating in earnest. Robert Moses and the decline. Robert Moses, New York City's immensely powerful parks commissioner from 1934 to 1960, is one of the most consequential figures in the history of Coney Island and one of the least enthusiastic about what it actually was. Moses had a vision of what public recreation should look like: clean, orderly, quiet, supervised. And Coney Island's carnivalesque amusement culture fit none of those criteria. He found the noise and chaos and commercial raucousness of the place aesthetically offensive, and he had the institutional power to act on his preferences. Moses directed public investment toward the beach and boardwalk infrastructure, while consistently discouraging new private investment in the amusement facilities, effectively allowing the parks and rides to continue aging without replacement. He also moved the New York Aquarium from its Manhattan location to the Coney Island site in 1957, which brought the city's institutional weight to bear on the neighborhood, but in a form that had nothing to do with the amusement culture that had defined it. Placing a public aquarium in the space where Dreamland once stood was, whether or not it was Moses's specific intention, a clear statement about which version of Coney Island the city preferred. Suburbanization did the rest. The post-war boom gave working-class New York families cars, mobility, and access to newer, more modern entertainment options that made Coney Island's aging rides and deteriorating infrastructure look shabby by comparison. Families who had once spent summer Sundays on the Coney Island boardwalk were now driving to newer, cleaner attractions in the suburbs, or simply spending weekends at their own backyards in communities that didn't exist before the war. The subway still ran to Coney Island, but the demographic it brought increasingly reflected the neighborhoods it passed through, and those neighborhoods were changing in ways that made the broader middle-class family market harder to reach. Steeplechase Park, still operating under the Tillieu family successors, closed in 1964. A developer named Fred Trump, father of Donald Trump, purchased the land with plans to develop it and demolish the Pavilion of Fun. He threw a party at the demolition site and invited guests to smash tiles off the walls with sledgehammers, which was either a marketing exercise or something to do on a Saturday, depending on how you look at it. He eventually sold the land to the city for $4 million. The former Dreamland property became the New York Aquarium site. The original Luna Park land became a housing complex that retained the name. By the 1970s, the Cyclone roller coaster itself, the 1927 wooden coaster that had survived everything, narrowly escaped demolition due to public preservation efforts, and was eventually designated a New York City landmark in 1988. Astroland and the Long Twilight. Astroland opened in 1962 on a section of Coney Island with a space-age theme that fit the era's obsession with the space race and the broader American fascination with the future. It was a smaller, more modest operation than the original parks had been, but it kept Coney Island's amusement identity alive through decades when everything else was closing or decaying. Astroland operated the Cyclone and added its own rides through the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, sustaining the minimum critical mass of carnival energy needed to maintain any identity as an amusement destination worth visiting. During the 1970s and 1980s, Coney Island was surrounded by urban poverty and crime that made the broader neighborhood feel unsafe to many potential visitors, a reality that further suppressed the investment that might have reversed the physical decline of the attractions. Various redevelopment proposals circulated through city planning offices for decades without producing anything significant. The political will and private capital never aligned at the same moment long enough to translate proposal into construction. Coney Island became a recurring subject of planning reports and civic debates about the future of Brooklyn's waterfront, none of which produced the sustained commitment needed to actually rebuild what decades of neglect had eroded. Astroland sold to Thor Equities in 2006. The new owner negotiated to keep the park going for 2 more seasons while broader redevelopment plans were formulated. In 2008, Astroland closed for good, marking the end of the direct operational lineage that connected modern Coney Island to its original amusement park tradition. The Cyclone, now a landmark, continued operating independently as one of the few genuine physical threads connecting the place to its own history. The return, sort of. A new Luna Park, operated by Central Amusement International and entirely unconnected to the original Thompson-Dundee creation except by name and location, opened on the Coney Island Boardwalk in 2010. The new park has expanded steadily since, adding modern steel roller coasters alongside the surviving Cyclone and Wonder Wheel, and its annual visitors number in the millions. A minor league baseball stadium, now known as Maimonides Park, opened in 2001 on the former Steeplechase Park site, bringing professional baseball back to Brooklyn for the first time since the Dodgers left for Los Angeles after the 1957 season. The Brooklyn Cyclones, a New York Mets affiliate, play there, and the stadium gives the neighborhood an anchor institution institution with a regular draw from May through September. The boardwalk remains, though sections of it have required ongoing repair, and the broader infrastructure of the neighborhood reflects decades of deferred investment. Nathan's Famous is still there. The Wonder Wheel still turns, the Cyclone still runs, still one of the most physically intense wooden roller coasters in the world, in the opinion of many who've ridden it, operating on essentially the same track it opened with in 1927. What Coney Island is today is harder to define than what it was at any earlier point. It's not the Nickel Empire, it's not the Electric Eden of Luna Park's heyday, it's not the post-war decline or the urban crisis era emptiness of the 1970s. It's something in between, a partial revival that has restored some of what made the place significant without fully resolving the economic and infrastructural challenges that have accumulated over a century of alternating boom and neglect. What it was and what it meant. The case that Coney Island matters historically, beyond being an interesting story about rides and fires, rests on what it did to American culture in the decade between 1895 and 1905. The three competing parks, and the infrastructure of transportation and entertainment that built up around them, essentially invented the commercial leisure industry as it still exists today. The concepts they developed, enclosed admission-charging entertainment spaces, immersive themed environments, the deliberate creation of experience as a product, are the direct ancestors of Disney World, Six Flags, Universal Studios, and every other major theme park anywhere on the planet. The social dimension matters too. Coney Island, at its peak, was one of the few places in American public life where the rigid class and gender barriers of the progressive era relaxed. Men and women rode rides together. The immigrant working class and the lower middle class shared space with each other in ways that the formal social environments of the era didn't permit. The beach and the boardwalk were genuinely democratic in a country that otherwise wasn't particularly interested in democracy of experience. One scholar summarized it as New York's psychological safety valve, the place where the pressure of urban industrial life could be released briefly into the sensation of speed and laughter and spectacle. That function never entirely disappeared, even as the parks burned and the infrastructure aged and the political winds shifted. Something about the specific geography, a beach at the edge of the city, reachable by anyone with a subway token, facing an open ocean, kept Coney Island in the imagination long after any rational calculus of visitor comfort would have suggested going somewhere else. The fires, the bankruptcies, the political indifference, the suburban flight, the decades of deferred investment, all of it followed a place that had risen so fast and so specifically that its very nature made sustaining it difficult. What Luna Park, Steeplechase, and Dreamland had created wasn't just a set of attractions. It was a cultural moment that happened to be built out of wood and fiberglass, and moments don't last in the physical world no matter how many times you try to rebuild them. Whether the current revival will amount to a genuine regeneration, or simply the latest chapter in a long pattern of partial recovery, followed by partial decline, is genuinely unclear. But the Cyclone is still running, the hot dogs are still being sold, and the ocean hasn't moved. That's something. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.